All he ever wanted, right from his young age, was to break free from the racial discrimination all around him. But the more he tried, the more difficult it seemed.
Don't you sass me, boy. This is a white building. You can't own this place.
This is the recap of the movie The Banker, a true life story of a young black boy who changed the real estate narrative in America forever.
Bernard, Garrett.
Yes, officer. Is there a problem?
We received a complaint about you.
She said you were impersonating the owner of the building.
I do own the building, officer. All the paperwork's filed downtown.
This actually looks real.
Try to be more respectful to your tenants.
Yes, sir, officer.
Enjoy the recap.
Sorry for the inconvenience.
The story begins in Willis, Texas, in 1939, where a young black boy named Bernard Garrett shines shoes for businessmen outside a local bank. As he works, he often listens intently to wealthy white men discussing business, money, and real estate. One day, he eavesdrops on a bank meeting through an open window, only to be chased away by a passing police officer. That evening, back home, Bernard's father comes across his son's notebook filled with notes on finance and investment. He was impressed by Bernard's natural understanding of the world of money. Nonetheless, he warns his son about the harsh realities of race in America. According to him, no matter how talented or determined Bernard might be, the doors to financial success will always be closed to a black man. But Bernard was driven by a fierce ambition and tells his father that he is determined to prove him wrong. The scene then shifts to 1954 in Los Angeles, where an adult Bernard arrives with his wife Eunice and their young son Bernard Jr. to stay with Eunice's uncle Jackson. As they settle in, during dinner, Jackson suggests Bernard find work at Northrop, a company that's hiring black workers. However, Bernard politely declines and explains his plan to build a fortune through real estate investment. But Jackson is very skeptical about this, and he plays down Bernard's lofty ambitions. For the time being, Bernard rents a shed in Jackson's backyard, hoping to save enough for a home of their own. The next morning, Bernard drives his cousin Tony to work. When Tony's friend Matt sees Bernard's car and asks what Bernard's uncle does, Tony proudly tells him that his uncle owns buildings. As time passes, Bernard begins pursuing his real estate goals, visiting properties and meeting owners to discuss prices. One day, he shows Eunice a promising property in a predominantly white neighborhood. Though it's affordable, the renovations would cost more than they can currently manage. So, Eunice suggests seeking help from Joe, an old acquaintance of hers, but Bernard immediately dismisses the idea after meeting Joe and sees that he is too carefree and most likely unreliable. But Eunice is insistent, and she tells Bernard that he should reconsider. In the meantime, Bernard approaches a property owner named Patrick and requests a $10,000 loan for renovations of one of the properties. But Patrick rejects the idea, telling him that that is not how he does his business. While they talked, Bernard notices a gift from Mr. Reed, a banker at Mid-City Bank, on one of Patrick's shelves. Seizing the opportunity, he visits Mid-City Bank to meet Mr. Reed. But despite Mr. Reed visibly sitting in the room, Bernard is told he isn't available. Undeterred by this, Bernard waits outside where he eventually pitches his business idea as Mr. Reed leaves office. Although the attempt fails, Patrick hears about Bernard's persistence and is impressed. So, he changes his mind and agrees to the deal because he admires Bernard's unconventional approach. To celebrate, Bernard and Eunice go out to a nightclub where Bernard runs into Joe again. However, Bernard remains cold and dismissive towards Joe. The next day, Bernard begins renovations on the new property, but soon, a white tenant confronts him, claiming they don't belong to the neighborhood. But Bernard calmly informs her that he's now the owner of the property, to the woman's utter disbelief. When Matt joins them at work that day, Bernard checks with him if he's comfortable working for a black man. Matt shrugs it off, saying the only color that matters to him is green. Later on, their progress is interrupted once more when police arrive, claiming that Bernard is impersonating the owner based on a complaint from the tenant. When Bernard shows them the proof of ownership, the officers are forced to apologize to him and leave. In the meantime, the tenant who made the call moves out of the property when she learns that Bernard and his family are also moving in. Soon, other black families start renting in the building, and his venture quickly becomes successful. While acknowledging Bernard's talent, Patrick proposes a 50-50 partnership to acquire more rental properties. Bernard, who believes that Patrick's presence as the face of the company will help them expand faster, agrees to the deal. The partnership flourishes, with Bernard, Eunice, Tony, and Matt contributing to renovations and furnishing the properties. One day, Bernard surprises Eunice with the key to a mansion, telling her that it is their new home. Months later, Patrick unexpectedly dies, and with his wife not ready to continue with their partnership, she offers Bernard 25% of their jointly acquired properties, as his name isn't on any official documents. Though Bernard finds this unfair, he has no choice but to accept. While seeking for help, Bernard approaches Mr. Reed once more, but he refuses to meet with him. Frustrated, Bernard has a great insight while leaving the bank. He sees the financial firm's leasing space in the bank-owned building, and that was when he realizes owning such a property could give him leverage in securing loans, especially since Mr. Reed's bank is housed in that same building. Bernard eventually reaches out to Joe, who owns 18 rental properties, and proposes a partnership to buy the banker's building. If successful, they would gain influence over the bank's leasing space there. Joe expresses doubt about whether sellers would deal with them due to their race, and to address this, Bernard decides to enlist Matt to serve as the public face of their business. Although he was initially hesitant, he eventually agrees after Bernard and Joe promise to teach him everything about real estate. To prepare Matt for his role, Joe teaches him golf, a skill which is very essential for networking with affluent individuals. Meanwhile, Bernard introduces Matt to Donald, Joe's trusted banker, who agrees to lend them up to $200,000 for the purchase. Confident by what he knows, Bernard assures Donald they'll secure the building for less. In the end, Bernard and Joe proceed to mentor Matt in real estate, etiquette, and business strategies. Matt quickly learns the methods and starts to gain confidence. During a golf outing, Matt impresses the building's owner, Charles Renault, with his skills. So, the two arrange a meeting to discuss the sale, and this sets the stage for a potential deal. A week later, Matt prepares himself for the pivotal meeting as he meticulously rehearses his strategy. When the day finally arrives, the meeting proceeds seamlessly as Matt showcases his profound knowledge of the real estate market, demonstrating his sharp mental calculations that leave Charles impressed. In the end, Matt successfully secures a deal to purchase the building for $1,560,000. The group celebrates their triumph as their momentum continues to grow. Soon, they begin forging connections with powerful bankers as they steadily expand their real estate ventures. Over a period of time, they acquired more prestigious properties in predominantly white neighborhoods, solidifying their rising status as formidable real estate tycoons. Their influence becomes so significant that they even host the U.S. vice president at one of their bankers' buildings. Years pass, and Bernard decides to visit his father, who beams with pride at Bernard's accomplishments. The next morning, during a walk with his young son, Bernard spots the Mainland Bank, the very site where he once shined shoes for wealthy men. Overcome with determination, he shares his ambition to purchase the bank with Joe. Though Joe hesitates, citing the complexities of bank management and the racial hostility prevalent in Texas, Bernard insists on moving forward, suggesting they could use Matt as the frontman, just as they had with their previous ventures. With assistance from Donald, Matt manages to purchase Mainland Bank. However, the previous owner and his son, Florence, were to retain a 20% stake. Under the new leadership, the bank begins offering loans to responsible black borrowers. Within months, the loan volume more than doubles, enabling black families to secure better homes and helping black businesses expand. However, Florence, who is still an executive at the bank, becomes alarmed by the new practice of lending to black clients. He warns Matt and the others that the bank could face severe backlash, including a financial run. To escalate matters, he had anonymously reported the bank's practices to the U.S. Treasury Department, which eventually triggered an audit notice within a month. With this new challenge, Matt proposes a bold solution to purchasing a smaller bank and to split loans between the two institutions, thereby minimizing the risk of government interference. Joe and Bernard initially reject the plan as they doubt Matt's capabilities. Frustrated, Matt expresses gratitude for their guidance, but demands to become a partner in the business, or else he'll walk away. Left with no alternative, Joe and Bernard reluctantly agree. Matt eventually takes over the newly acquired Marlin Bank, becoming a shareholder and quickly implementing financial strategies to stabilize operations. Despite these efforts, Florence soon informs Matt that a group of white clients is withdrawing funds from Mainland Bank, as they are convinced that the institution is linked to a black organization. While 5 clients had already left, Florence claims that he had managed to have persuaded 9 others to stay. The situation intensifies when a federal bank examiner arrives at Marlin Bank unannounced, demanding to review the master records. So, Matt quickly contacts Bernard for advice. Realizing the severity of the situation, Bernard prepares to intervene. Although initially reluctant, Bernard heeds Eunice's suggestion to disguise himself as a cleaner to provide covert support for Matt. She even had to remind him how she has done the same in the past to help their business. As Matt and the examiner begin their meeting, Bernard, disguised as a cleaner, quietly attempts to assist from outside. However, the examiner closes the door, preventing Bernard from overhearing or helping further. Recognizing the futility of his position, Bernard is forced to leave. Inside, Matt struggles with the examiner's questions and eventually has to excuse himself to retrieve some files. He uses the opportunity to consult with Bernard, Joe, and Eunice, but their advice was ultimately insufficient. In the end, the examiner uncovers several bad loans on the bank's books. As a result of this, Joe and Bernard are required to contribute $300,000 of their own funds to cover the bank's outstanding debts, placing their business under considerable strain. In the end, Matt showed deep remorse for causing Joe and Bernard to lose $300,000. However, a few days later, Joe receives an unexpected call from his partner, Donald, who informs him that Mainland Bank has purchased $300,000 in bad debt from Marlin Bank. Shocked by this development, Joe and Bernard rush to Mainland Bank to confront Matt, accusing him of fraud for buying bad loans. However, Matt defended himself as he claimed that he was trying to fix the problem. Not convinced by his methods, Bernard demands to see the bank's books immediately. But before they can proceed, federal officials arrive, announcing that the Treasury Department has revoked Mainland Bank's license. They terminate Matt's ownership, shut the bank down, and order everyone to vacate the premises. As Joe and Bernard step outside, they are immediately arrested by the FBI. Later on, in Washington, D.C., a lawyer informs Joe and Bernard that state charges against them have been dropped, but federal charges are still pending. The lawyer explains that an Arkansas senator is holding hearings on loose banking regulations, which could impact their case. Meanwhile, Matt continued to face legal troubles for his role in mismanaging the bank. He is given a choice: either accept a prison sentence or testify that Joe and Bernard orchestrated the illegal transactions. In the end, Matt chooses the latter, testifying in court that Joe and Bernard hired him, instructed him, and guided his actions concerning the loans and money transfers. In the meantime, Bernard is also given two options. He can corroborate Matt's story and walk free, or deny it and risk his testimony being compared to those of several white witnesses. If the court finds him lying, he faces imprisonment. Conflicted about this, Bernard talks to his wife, as he expresses fears that raising the broader issue of racial inequities would jeopardize any immunity deal. Bernard then discusses the situation with Joe, and the two reflect on their years of hard work and sacrifice. In the end, Bernard ultimately decides to testify, fully acknowledging the risks involved. In court, he invokes the nation's founding principle that all men are created equal, emphasizing how far the country has strayed from that promise. Despite repeated warnings from the judges that his immunity could be revoked, Bernard boldly explains that without access to loans, people can't start businesses, build wealth, or realize the American dream. In the end, his testimony shines a light on the systemic barriers Black Americans face. In the aftermath, Bernard and Joe are sentenced to 3 years in prison, and the federal government seizes everything they own, including 177 buildings and their personal fortunes. Upon their release, Bernard is greeted by Joe and Eunice. As Bernard talks about going home, Eunice reminds him that they have no home left. But Bernard smiles and reveals a secret to her. Before the testimony, Matt had been threatened with a 50-year sentence unless he took full responsibility. So he had confided in Bernard, who advised him to protect himself but also urged him to help secure their future. Bernard had convinced Matt to quietly purchase 2 properties in the Bahamas, one for him and one for Joe, before their assets were seized. The film closes with a note that 3 years later, in 1968, the Fair Housing Act was passed, marking a pivotal step in dismantling racial disparities in housing. Bernard's sacrifice helped pave the way for this change. And there is the 2020 true life story movie, The Banker. If you enjoyed this recap and would want to see more of this kind of video, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment for us. Until our next recap, stay safe.